Diggerverted Man here with just some deep, quick thoughts for you of the... So, Skylar Fiction, one of my many people that I'm subscribed to, had a video talking about this guy Morpheus who was talking something to do with the effect of that because artificial insemination exists today and it requires intelligence to do that, then that means that way back when God could have done the same thing to Mary, you see. And then it gets stupid after that. But it actually made me think about something I once pondered as a Christian, to try to come up with secular, or at the time I didn't know if the word secular, so it was mundane or natural explanations for the events in the Bible. I mean, if that's all that these darn skeptics and atheists are complaining about, then if there's a natural way to do it, then what's the problem, right? If we just get rid of the miracles in the Bible, then maybe they won't have a problem with believing in the Bible. Although the whole point of a miracle is to prove that there's a God, so if you do get rid of the miracles in the Bible, then you have a new problem, but we'll put that to the side. I came up with, as a Christian, an idea that I didn't mention or say to anyone until I began to be a skeptic, and that was a very naturalistic possibility of how Mary could have gotten pregnant without ever having sexual intercourse. Now, this is sort of graphic, so I will simply demonstrate to some extent what I'm talking about. So I'm just going to pretend that this little snake friend of mine is Mary's hairbrush. So she uses it to comb her hair, and she also uses it for other things, if you get what I'm saying. Now, for whatever reason, one day she drops it. Now, Joseph happened to come in while she was out and happened to get bored and do something to entertain himself and spill some stuff on the hairbrush. Now, later he left and Mary came back and was bored again and decided to have her way with the hairbrush. And then she got pregnant and realized that she was pregnant later on, and both of them forgot that they were in the same house or area at the same time, and neither one of them would have ever talked about the fact that they had had fun by themselves, because back then that was something that nobody talked about, but I'm sure that people did. So there you have it, a completely mundane, plausible, possible explanation of how Mary, if she actually existed, and Joseph, if he actually existed, could have had a kid without actually engaging in the sexual act, or even being in the same room at the same time together. Now, a male's delivery system can survive. I'm being careful because I don't know what YouTube mutes these days. For a while, not too long, but for a pretty decent amount of time. So, although the probability is against it, it could happen. Now you might say, well, why wouldn't Mary clean it off? Well, if she really didn't know what it was or wasn't paying attention, then could have happened. If she was relatively naive or just in a hurry to get some, brush action going, it could have happened that way. It could be any number of long, solid objects that this occurred upon, too. So, if we have a naturalistic explanation, and this is where I came into problems with this idea as a Christian, I realized, wait a minute, we don't need any supernatural explanation, and this negates the whole idea of proving that Jesus has a divine origin, which is a big problem. Although Mary being a virgin didn't come into play until later on, there are ways around that, kind of, sort of, as a Christian, but it's kind of important for the modern Christian, at any rate, to think that the virginal birth happened. If you lose that, you don't lose too much, but you do lose some doctrine. So, and of course, modern day Christians tend to be very lazy about their own doctrines and how the Bible really got to where it is and the history of it and so on and so forth. And when you try to correct them on that, of course, they're not going to listen to you because you're an unbeliever. You don't belong here. We don't want to talk to you. This is how we're going to deal with unbelievers. Just don't interact with them. Don't talk to them. Which actually goes against 1 Peter. Always be ready to give the reason for the hope that you have, but screw that, because we're not going to follow the Bible that we want to preach. But then we are going to debate you if you come to a certain place in real life. Then we'll debate you there, but not online. We won't do it. Okay. I don't know. But yes, you could figure out mundane explanations for all, if not most, of the biblical miracles that happen. There would be a few exceptions. Lot's wife turning into salt. Pretty hard to come up with one for that. Pillar of fire might have been misconstrued as St. Elmo's fire, a ball of lightning moving around the ground. And they called it fire, even though it wasn't fire, because maybe they'd never seen that before. Although rare, it is possible. It didn't last as long as it became in the story, because the story gets exaggerated. But what you have is a natural phenomenon that somebody doesn't know how to explain. They explain that story to somebody else, the story gets exaggerated, and eventually gets written down. But by the time it gets written down, it's been exaggerated in so many steps that the end result is something far more wondrous than what it first was. In fact, there's already natural explanations of some of the so-called miracles in the Bible already. Rainbows, supposedly, according to Genesis, didn't exist until after the flood with Noah. They were put there as a promise that God would never again flood the entire world, even though that does leave open that God would flood parts of the world, but not the whole thing. So rainbows didn't exist before then? That's a little bit hard for me to accept as a skeptic, because we know how rainbows are made. So we already know the explanation of rainbows, and they would have been around before the flood. But once you have a deity involved, really all bets are off, because the deity can change the rules of physics and the laws of the universe as we know them, making every single miracle not really a miracle at all, because you still would have to suspend the laws in order to do the thing. Which means you have to now have laws that allow that thing to happen, and then turn off those laws. So it's still natural no matter how you look at it. We just call it supernatural because we don't understand it. And the moment that we did understand it, it would cease to be supernatural. So why the hang up on that word, supernatural? I don't know. It's another mystery of apologetics and of doctrinal thinking to think that it matters if you think of God as a supernatural entity or not. If God did exist, it would be a natural entity, just one that we don't fully understand. There is no such thing as supernatural. That's just a holding place for natural phenomenon that we don't understand. Now somebody's going to be like, Deconverted Man, you're a naturalist. You assume naturalism, blah, blah, blah. Well, I don't assume that. But the natural world and material universe is all that we can really know about for sure. Everything else would be a guess at best. So I'm comfortable with the idea of there being room for a naturalistic deity of some sort. I don't think that there's any reason to think that there is, at least no logical reason that I'm aware of. But nonetheless, if there was such a thing, it once you understood it, you wouldn't have a need to call it supernatural anymore. So the only reason to call it supernatural right now is because you don't really understand what it is. To say something is beyond the natural realm is to basically definition it out of existence. You're saying it lies beyond reality. Well, then it doesn't exist. So I think that that's a bad apologetic route to take. I think that the apologetics, or lack thereof, that is happening today is less about teaching those of the faith to make good arguments and more about just repeating the same arguments that have been used over and over again. And now people are kind of recycling old arguments that have already come up and coming up with new, more bizarre ways to hold on to their beliefs that aren't arguments at all and simply are non sequiturs. Something desperately needs to happen if Christians want their religion to survive. A radical change has to be made within Christianity from the inside out to not only get everybody on the same page doctrinally, but also to produce new arguments. But they're not going to do that, so they're going to eventually die out as a religion. It will take time. We probably won't see it, but it's going to happen. Religion has to change or it will die. Now, it might continue to change, and as it does so, we'll lose Christianity because it's so different from what we know today that it's basically not Christianity anymore, and that's fine too. But of course, that doesn't help us right now. We pesky skeptics and atheists and agnostics, anti-theists, etc., just want people to think. That's all. Is it so much? Look, fine, you believe in God. Okay, I get that. I understand that. Fine. But can't you just think a little bit harder than you are about it? I mean, really, to use this bizarre idea that, well, today we have microchips that contain information and you can save it. So that means you can save the information of your soul. No, it doesn't. Stop it. Although that would be cool if we could prove it, but there would be some way to prove it. Unless it's magic. Which it kind of is. So there's reason to be skeptical of it. But thinking that way is dangerous, so we won't do that. Until next time, continue to be skeptical about everything except for the idea of giving me money through PayPal or Patreon. What do you mean I'm not linking them on the screen? Put them on the screen! I really gotta get a new director.